What up, guys? Welcome to the Jiu-Jitsu podcast number. It's a lot, 316, right?
Stone Cold Steve
We're
Austin
on the Stone
episode.
Cold Steve Austin
That's
episode.
what we're talking about today. Buckle
It's
up.
that's interesting that maybe 30 something years ago you probably would have called it the Jesus 316, the John 316 episode. Now it's Austin 316. That's what we know about. Yeah, drink your beers. But anyway, today's episode is going to be on side control scapes. It's one of two-part episode that we'll be doing. The second part, if you're listening to this anytime on the week of Monday, the 17th of June, 2024, we'll be doing a Jiu-Jitsu podcast live on Friday. That's June the 21st around 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we'll be doing the second part of this show. So shameless plug, this is going to be kind of going over some ideas from a course that I'm getting ready to release on side control, scapes, guard retention, defense, things like that. It's a super important part of jiu-jitsu, probably one of the most important parts that a lot of times it goes overlooked. People do just the bare necessities to it, and then they kind of move on. And, today I'm going to share some ideas on maybe why that's not the best thing to do. And we'll also talk about the defensive side and why it's so important if you want to be really good at offense. Because when it comes down to it, what do we all want to do? We all want to submit people, right? We all want to put people into submissions, get our hand raised in competitions, walk off the mat and feel like we got the better of the exchange. We all want to do that. That's what we do when we're in the gym, right? And so it takes a little bit of rewiring and rethinking. But one of the ways to make that happen is to actually go back and do the other side of the equation. And I'll talk about why that is, why it worked for me, and how it's helped me out. And I've seen it do the same thing in a lot of my students. And so we'll share those ideas with you. And so regardless of whether or not you get the course that I have coming up in June 2024, you will still get a lot from this. And for your jiu-jitsu, I think it'll be very helpful to you. So thank you for being here. Big thanks to our sponsors for helping make the podcast happen. Charlotte's Web CBD. If you guys have never tried them out, or if you've never tried CBD out in general, I encourage you to check out Charlotte's Web's products. Again, they're part of my sort of nighttime routine that I think helps out to supplement my recovery. Again, I just posted a thing on the social media on Instagram the other day, and I was talking about, if you're in this for longevity's sake, that, the first things are always diet, proper sleep, nutrition, training properly, that kind of thing. If you're not getting ready for a competition, to always leave a little bit in the tank. Don't go to the absolute max every training session. By the way, a friend of mine who is a ADCC competitor multiple times, he sent me a message and he was like 100% facts. And again, so it's being confirmed by really good competitors, really good jiu-jitsu black belts. But again, that's kind of the big idea for recovery, right? And again, then you get into supplements at the end. When you get all those things in place, then you get into supplements. People a lot of times want to approach it the other way. They want like the pill. They want the magical supplement that's somehow going to boost the recovery while they're friggin' boozing every night, not sleeping, and then they eat fast food. It's like you can take whatever supplements you want to. You could go get on TRT and take all the steroids you want. You're still not going to make up for all those other factors, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just the way it is. Anyway, with that said, one of my supplements that I like to mix into the recovery routine is Charlotte's Web CBD. Again, they've been supporting the podcast, and I've been enjoying the products for a number of years. It is one of my nighttime routines where I take the tincture with my hot shower that I do, then I get ready to wind down for bed and get ready to go to sleep. Usually my little routine's changed over the years. My routine now is that I'll read for a little bit, and then I switch to audiobooks. Been listening to I got really into the Dune series a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it's good.
And so I've read the first three that Frank Herbert wrote, and then now I'm going backwards and I'm reading, or listening rather, to the three that his son wrote, like as prequels. So there's House Atreides, House Harkonnen, and then there's House Carino, which is like the Emperor's house. And so they're really good. I honestly think that the prequels are like better than some of the stuff that, like, the first Dune's really good. The second two and three, they're weird. Like the third book in the Dune series, I wasn't a big fan. It's a bit odd if any of you guys have read it. But the three prequels that I haven't read the third one, but this I'm going through the second one now. The ones that the son and one of his colleagues wrote, they're really good. Like, I think they're better than like the books that Frank Herbert and those guys wrote. So anyway, listen to audiobooks, and then I wind down, and CBD is a part of that. And if you guys want to check out any of their products and get 30% off, then go to charlottesweb.com, use the promo code Chewjitsu30 for 30% off. Also, if you guys want to get some jiu-jitsu gear or apparel, t-shirts, no-gi shorts, rash guards, whatever it is that you're looking for, check out my buddy Matt's website, epicrollbjj.com. A lot of cool designs, good quality stuff, great customer service. Matt's been supporting the podcast for a number of years. He also supports a lot of competitors that are out there. He is a jiu-jitsu black belt who's supporting other jiu-jitsu practitioners out there. And I'm a big fan of his products. And if you guys want to get some new gear and save 20% off, use the promo code at epicrollbjj.com, Chewjitsu20 for 20% off. If you want to support the podcast directly, you can join our Patreon, and you can become a patron at patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. Upon joining, you'll get access to a podcast with no ad reads in case you don't like these things. Some of you guys do. I know that we have several patrons that still listen to the podcast because of the ad reads. They say they find them entertaining sometimes because I go off on tangents. So thank you guys for supporting it one way or the other. But that said, you also get access to an exclusive library of content that we've been building for a number of years with a lot of different content and videos that are not released anywhere else. Everything from seminars I've recorded of different training camps that I've done. Also, we have warm-up routines and stretching routines that Eugene's put together as a doctor of physical therapy, in case you weren't aware, who knows how the body works, and he puts together routines specifically for jiu-jitsu practitioners. If you guys have been to some of my jiu-jitsu camps, you've gone through some of these, and you can get access to them there at the patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. And last but not least, guys, if you want to get my daily email that I go into, you can check it out at jujitsu.net/join. It's CHEWJITSU.net/join. When you join, you will get a couple of free ebooks and some videos that I send to you for free. It's totally just a gift for joining up. And then afterwards, I will send you my daily email. From there, you'll get everything from emails about jiu-jitsu training, diet, weight training, longevity stuff that I'm dealing with as an older grappler, right? Some of the things that I'm having to adjust with my training. And then I'll go off on the rails and talk about philosophy, different things that I think are just very interesting. Sometimes there's some history stuff in there. And I also give special discounts and offers to the Chew Crew, which is what I call that group in the emails, exclusively give to them. And you can get all that at jujitsu.net/join. So guys, let's jump into this. So here's the deal. This is something that, I was thinking about. When you look at when someone comes into jiu-jitsu, one of the things that happens is that they quickly get really focused on submission, sweeps, guard passes, these sorts of things, the fun things in jiu-jitsu, right? And it's easy to do that because, that's what we want to do. Now, they'll typically end up in a situation where they're forced to survive, right? But what tends to happen, at least what I found, is that once someone gets to sort of a prerequisite level of survival and escapability, they begrudgingly ever go back. And they only go back out of complete necessity, opposed to developing their escapes to the point where they feel like they're able to escape anyone or defend against anyone. Now, there's a reason why I think this is so important. Compare it for a second, if you will, with kind of like money, right? So like if you've got money in the bank and you got a few nickels you can rub together, you could potentially put your money into more like risky investments that could possibly be more rewarding, right? But if you're not doing so well and you're living paycheck to paycheck and money's really tight, you're probably going to avoid investing your money into anything because, one wrong mistake, one wrong move could lead you into a situation where you don't have a roof over your head, right? Maybe you could think about it as gymnasts with crash pads, right? If you've ever seen a gymnast doing some high flying gymnastic stunts, you'll see that they have these big pads underneath of them. And those pads basically give them something to fall on should they make a mistake. Now, imagine, if you will, if they try to practice gymnastics with no crash pads, just straight concrete, where one wrong move will have you basically sipping meals through a straw for the rest of your life, right? Gymnastics would probably look a little different now, wouldn't it, right? Now, think about this with jiu-jitsu. If your defense and your escapes aren't very good, then what's going to happen is you're always going to find it very hard to really give it your all when it comes to sweeps, submissions, guard passes, and all the other offensive techniques, right? What you'll probably do is you'll get into these positions and you'll just hang on and play it safe, right? And you'll have the opportunities passing you by and you'll never quite go for them, right? And I know the situation really well because I did it for years, right? That was kind of my thing. There's a long time where being stuck on the bottom of side control or really any position was kind of like a boogeyman. But side control in particular was my worst position. If someone got me in a mount, I felt pretty good. And I always felt pretty good about escaping back. But side control was the one where I just felt like I would get pinned there and I just couldn't do a lot of things. And what happened was this basically caused me to spend years of my game underperforming in competitions. I found it really hard to open up and, go for things during the competition. So even when I would win, I always had this lingering feeling like I could have done more because I saw opportunities to go, but I didn't go for them because I was scared. And then also too, when it came to exploring and developing my game in the gym, because again, to try new things in the gym, you've got to open up and do things that maybe you're not so good with. It was really hard for me to do that because, again, I'm worried about losing in front of people, if you want to call it losing, right? Because we can say losing and learning. But again, no one likes to go to the gym and get smashed relentlessly. But I was worried about opening up my game, going for something new, and then getting smashed afterwards. Maybe some of you guys experience a similar situation. Now, on the flip side, once I got to a point where I developed my defense and escapes in my bottom game, right? My whole game changed in jiu-jitsu, right? Because in the gym, I could go for techniques and go for new stuff that I was working on without any fear whatsoever. And I was able to develop a lot of new weapons. I was also able to get a lot more submissions because, again, when you give something 100%, rather than having this lingering what if in the back of your head, you're far more likely to have some success with it. And then in competitions, my submission rate skyrocketed. It's funny. I have a really high rate of submission in competitions. But if you were to watch me roll in the gym, you wouldn't necessarily think that because I don't necessarily get the most submissions. And a lot of times I'm putting myself in bad spots purposely. It's interesting how this works. There was I've talked to several people who have trained with Gary Tonin in some fashion, some of them very close with Gary Tonin. And Gary Tonin is a very aggressive grappler. If you watch him compete, ultra aggressive, right? Goes for submissions, has a high rate of submission, just all over the place. What's interesting about him is that when I talk to these people who have trained with him, they all say sort of the same thing, that he will put himself into the worst positions. He'll let people put him into fully sunk in submissions and then find ways to escape and do all these different things. And then in the gym, he gets submitted a lot, right? Like he'll just get submitted by people, whatever, because he's letting himself get into these really awful spots. What's interesting though, is when he competes, he's reckless sometimes, just goes for it, right? And you think about, well, why does he have the ability to be reckless like that? Because he's not afraid, right? Fear will paralyze you. And many of you guys who sometimes say that you're maybe not that aggressive or you're not able to be really assertive with your techniques, some of it could be just simply there's people have different dispositions, right? Different temperaments. But you also might find that a lot of times it's because in the back of your head, you're like, I don't have good escapes. And so if you don't have good escapes, it's going to be really hard to go for it, right? So with that, whenever we're talking about any submissions, anytime we're going for something, right? No matter what the technique is, there's always going to be risk. There's
Yeah.
always going to be a little risk with it. And so again, when you have really good escapes, really good defense, and you know it, like you have really good true confidence in it, it works like a safety net. It's money in the bank. It's the crash pad to fall on, right? It allows you to play in a different way. And so one of the reasons why I'm doing this series and why we're doing this series here on the podcast and why I did the course was because it was a big game changer for me when I started opening up to my game because I wasn't afraid of being smashed in the bottom. And again, my guard retention got better. My escapes got better from side control, which meant that then I could go for a armbar from a position. And if I lost it, well, good, no big deal, because I know I can escape. I know I can get out of these positions. And I think it's something that a lot of people, they just ignore. It's not something fun, right? Like, when you watch a lot of the viral videos that are out there, they don't tend to be, the escape stuff, right? They tend to be the really cool back take, the super secret submission hack, all these things. It doesn't come down to the bare bones meat and potatoes of escapes. And so that's one of the reasons why I want to get into it, because I think it's really important. And I know we have a lot of people who are in their first handful of years of jiu-jitsu, and this is an important skill. I mean, we say it all the time, the first thing you should be doing is learning how to survive, but it doesn't mean necessarily that we own that advice. And for me, I didn't really sadly, I didn't really own this idea until I was like a brown and black belt. It wasn't until then that I actually developed a really good escaping ability. And so hopefully, I will be able to get some of you to not make the same mistake and not fall into the Schuster's folly of not developing your escapes and your defense to a point where you feel like sounds kind of funny, but you're a badass at escapes until very late in your jiu-jitsu, right? And so that's one of the reasons why we're getting into it. But again, if you want to make your offense better, one of the things you must do is you have to have a good defense, because if you don't, you'll always have that lingering, gnawing feeling in the back of your head that you don't have what it takes if this goes wrong. And that will always put you in a limiting position mentally, which then will translate physically with your techniques.
Yeah, I think you brought up a good point. Is it's a springboard, for a good offense. And the thing is, like for beginners or people early in their jiu-jitsu kind of journey, it's basically you're forced there. So you're forced to develop some type of defense and way to escape. When you get a little better, the necessity is less there, I think. But
Right,
then
because you don't have to go there as much.
You don't have to. And most of the time, if you're like a purple belt, the majority, and now it's different every gym, majority probably people that are training are probably less, like either equal or probably lower belt than you are. So I think you don't find yourself in that position. I think you can have some decent escapes or develop that aspect of your game. But then when you go up to the brown and black belt, you're like, oh, I'm having a hard time pulling the trigger. Why is that? Because, well, some of these brown and black belts have really excellent side control, and they can really pin you down and keep you there. And it could be a rough time. So I see it. And I think at first it's a matter of necessity. And then kind of you get away from it, right? Because I have all this fun stuff I can start to play with. And I think you don't put yourself there as often, or you don't find yourself there as often. I think over time that aspect of your game can decline, even though it's when you go and compete, it needs to be there. It needs to be very high level.
I mean, 100%. I mean, in the beginning of jiu-jitsu, right? When it comes to escapes and side control and stuff like that, you're basically drowning, right? I mean, that's really what it's like. Because again, what do you have to do? It's kind of funny when you think of them, right? I'll draw the parallel together in a second. But you're basically drowning. And so when you are drowning and you finally get out of it, you probably don't have the best feeling about the whole situation. So you're like, I want to get the hell out of there and I want to stay out of there, right?
That's right.
I remember my first time, I almost drowned as a kid because I'm stupid. And we were
it's not funny that you drown, just you call yourself stupid.
I mean, it's pretty funny.
Kids do dumb stuff though. Yeah, it's true. That's true.
So, it's the family was having a big cookout and my aunt had a big pool, right? And so we're out there all swimming, and I have swimmies on. The little arm things, inflatable arms.
Yeah.
And I'm out there in my swimmies and having a good old time just like normal. And then my cousin comes over, and my cousin used to wear swimmies like me, but he had gotten swim lessons, and so he no longer needed them. And so he's swimming around without the swimmies and just getting all the praise and adulation of all the adults around me. They're like, oh my God, look how amazing Jamie is. Oh, he's so great, And so for me, being a little kid, I was so jealous, or I was envious, excuse me, envious, not jealous. I was envious because jealous would mean that you have something and you don't, but envious is you want something that someone else doesn't. So I was very envious. Yes. I was like, I want to be able to swim too. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, it's not that hard, right? Like, it's just, I'm looking at him. It's not that bad. I can do this. And so I asked my aunt, I was like, hey, can I go into the pool without swimmies? And she's like, no, you cannot. Keep your swimmies on. We don't want you to drown. So I was like, darn, I can't prove to everybody that I can do it. So we get done eating. And then, everybody's just kind of hanging around. We're not back in the pool yet, but everybody's kind of hanging out. So my thing is I'm thinking, well, I'm going to go jump in that pool without my swimmies and I'm going to show them. I'm going to show them I can do it. And in my head, I envision me swimming around, doing laps in the pool and being like, look at me. And then all the praise would be mine, right? So I jump into the pool and I sink and I come up and I see my head above the water. I'm like, yep, I'm fine. And then all of a sudden I go back down and my head goes below the water. Yep. And, it was like a 5-foot pool or something. And I'm a kid. So, I can push myself off the bottom and I get up and I can get some air, but I'm panicking. I'm freaking out. Sure. My breathing's spreading. And then so what's happening is I'm like going below the water and then popping up. And I can see my family maybe, 10 yards away. Jeez. And I'm like screaming like, ah! And then I pop up and I see my aunt get closer, or I see her notice me, and then I go down, I come up, I see her, she's a little bit closer, go down, I come up, she's even closer, and then eventually she pulls me out of the water. She's like, "What are you doing?" And I tell her the whole story, right? And
Yep.
anyway, my grandfather got me in swim lessons immediately the next week, and I remember I was terrified of the water, right? I didn't want to go to the water because I'm like, this is terrifying. So, we're all wearing life jackets and stuff while we're doing the swimming. And eventually, the last day of the swim lessons come around, and I would not take my life jacket off because I was scared because of the
Mm.
trauma that I'd had from like almost drowning myself, dumbass. And so when the last day comes, the instructor's name was Jason. He tells me, "Hey, man, just give me your life jacket. You don't have to do this." Everybody else in the pool had their jackets off except for me, and I was like, "Okay." So I hand him my jacket. He immediately grabs me and throws me into the pool, and I'm in the deep end. I'm in the 10-foot end, right? Now I get there, and as soon as I'm there, I'm swimming, and I'm like, "Yeah, I'm swimming." And like, look at me. And then, then I
Yeah.
was like, I was pumped. Now, he probably would have lost his job today, but I'm glad
Back in
that
the day, it's all right.
I'm glad that he did it back then
Sure.
because it basically broke me free. Now, the reason why I share that really long and drawn out story is because I got a big mouth, but also because when you have a situation like side control, it's very much the same, right? It's painful. We don't like it. It sucks being smashed on the bottom. And you literally feel like you're drowning sometimes in the beginning because your breathing's out of whack and everything else, right? And so what happens is once people do enough or get good enough that they can stay out of the position, they don't go back. Like they're like, I don't want to get back in there.
Yeah.
A lot of times, unless their coach forces them there, right? Unless they have a coach like Jason who says, "Give me your life jacket, I'm throwing you into the deep end," until their coach says, "No, no, I'm going to start you off in side control because that's what we're working today." A lot of times they don't go there voluntarily. And so that's a problem. And so that's one of the things where you have to go back to these positions because, like you said, the better you get in jiu-jitsu, the easier it is to stay away from these uncomfortable spots, and the easier it is to let those skills deteriorate. And they do deteriorate. Like again, you're probably never going to go backwards to the point where you were like a brand new white belt, of course. But again, just like any other technique, if you don't use it, you lose it a little bit. The
Yeah.
timing's off. You don't feel as sharp with it. It's just the way it is. And so you have to spend time in these positions, because otherwise, again, it's going to catch up to you and you're not going to be as efficient and not going to be effective. And especially in a position like escaping side control or any escape, really, efficiency is the name of the game because you're in this situation where you're in an inferior position and you will eventually run out of steam if you use your energy improperly.
Yeah. I think no one that I know of likes to be held down against their will and feeling like you can't move, and then having just you felt and I felt pressure, bottom side control of somebody that's got really good heavy pressure that do that good chest on chest, and man, it's like every time you breathe, your chest expands a little
Hmm.
less, and you feel like almost like you said, like you're drowning, like you're suffocating. And I think that's a very uncomfortable position to be in. And I think one of the first things we can maybe talk about, like maybe one of the first things is just being able to, in some way, find a way to relax in that position, to
Well,
get comfortable in that position.
Well, sure. And you want to think, I mean, before you get into that, you'd want to think about like, why are people panicking in the first place? There's multiple reasons why you may not like being like in the bottom of side control, why you might panic. I mean, it could be simply that, you had a situation where you experienced some sort of trauma in your past when you were
Yep.
younger,
Yep.
and you can have a panic attack like situation. I had that, right? Because when I was younger, I had a situation where, it was like, it was sexual abuse that came from an older teenager that was
Mhm.
around, and again, held down. Don't like being held down, right? So again, that
Sure.
was something where when I first started training, I didn't even realize it at the time, but friggin' hated being pinned down. Combine that with the fact that I wrestled and being on your back was the wrong thing to do for
Right.
years. So a lot of that. Then you get into situations where just anybody in general, if you pin them down to the point where they can't move and they don't feel like they can take a full breath, their nervous system just freaks out. You watch someone, then they're brand new, they just freak out in these positions. Their breathing changes, their body starts getting really like spazzy, and they're pushing and pulling the wrong spots. They're just going nuts. You also have situations where people are claustrophobic. That was another one I suffered from, where
Yes.
just anything where there's something covering your face and you don't feel like you have space to move can again, create a situation where you feel like you can't breathe, maybe in a sort of panic attack like situation. But even people that have been training for a long time, I've seen higher belts who, maybe not a complete panic situation, will definitely go into a weird mindset when they're pinned down by a lower belt, because they have this mistaken, misguided expectation of themselves that they're not supposed to lose to a lower belt, right? And all of these and more of these situations can cause panic, which again, I suffered from the panic too. I was there with you, or with anybody who suffers from it. I was there. Again, you can suffer from that, and again, causes all these problems. Now, to your point, you have to find a way to relax, right? And that's one of the first keys. If you're going to be good at side control escapes, is you have to learn how to first off relax. Going back to the idea that we were talking about earlier, like drowning. Basically, I'm sure you've had this before. You go into any sort of water sport. I've been, it's like surfing, done rafting, and did some other stuff with obviously swimming, different stuff out in the ocean, out in rivers. And one of the things they talk about is if you're caught in like a particular water current, the first piece of advice before anything else is you got to stay calm and relax. Because if you start flailing around, if you lose control of your breath, you're going to be in a bad situation. I remember surfing, they were talking about it. Like if you get knocked off your board, you find yourself underwater, and maybe you feel a current pulling you or something like that, and you don't know this way from that way sometimes under the water. The first thing you have to do is just relax. You can't freak out. You have to stay in control of your breathing. Because if you don't, then obviously you're not going to last that long, right? Not in a water situation. If you're caught in like a rip current where you're being pulled out to the water, a lot of times they'll say you need to swim not against the current, but swim like parallel to the shore to get out of the current.
Yeah.
But again, the first point of the advice is just stay calm and breathe, relax, don't freak out, because if you freak out, that's where things get really bad.
Yeah.
And you can kind of think about how this applies to jiu-jitsu with this, like, stay calm and relax with the breathing thing. Watch any newcomer get stuck underneath someone. I mean, they start flailing around recklessly. They're breathing sporadic. They push with all their muscle, and then after a minute or two, they're just cooked and ready to be submitted. They're just done. But on the flip side, if you watch a skilled practitioner who is well-versed in escapes, watch them when they deal with just the most uncomfortable positions. They're calm. They bring their hands together. They're protecting their neck like they should. They get their breathing under control. A lot of times they're not even breathing through their mouth. They're just nose breathing.
Mm-hmm.
And then they wait in that position and position their body and wait till they have the right opportunity to escape. And they do all of this without expending much energy at all. And so I think that, if you're one of those people who gets stuck in the bottom of side control, then one of the things that you have to do is you have to start by, if you panic in the position, is you got to start relaxing, and you have to treat it like the drowning situation where you got to get control of your breath. And I think breathing and focusing on bringing your hands together are the first two simple things that you can do, right? Instead of trying to escape, it's about focusing on breathing first. And I know it sounds so simple, just breathe. But again, that's what's going to keep you alive. Think about how hard it is to do jiu-jitsu. Like, try your next roll, hold your breath and try to roll. See how long you last. Right. And you guys are like, oh, Chewy, of course I can't roll. But if you watch people who panic when they're in the bottom of side control, they do just that. They hold their breath, and then they're starting trying to move. And then, of course, they're gonna exhaust themselves. But if you can breathe properly, and there's a way that I like to breathe personally, there's like a style of breathing that I'll use that can basically help bring me down a little bit, cool me down a little bit, get me a little bit, get rid of that tunnel vision, get rid of that panic. And then from there, you bring your hands together and be more defensive with them, so that this way you can focus on first getting calm, surviving, and then you move on to, your escapes or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I think a great way to do that, to start to develop that, is time and position. When you're maybe even giving people full roll is kind of like a tough way to go about it. I mean, you're forced that you could sit there for 5-6 minutes, but like if you're doing like maybe positional work, I think it's a great way to start to develop some comfort, because it's going to be maybe a short round, maybe a minute and a half. We've done this in mount all the time. Like, hey, somebody's going to start in bottom mount, somebody on top. You're going to try to just keep yourself safe and not get submitted. You can do the same thing, I feel like, in that way for side control. Like somebody's just going to try to hold you, or then try to try to submit you, and you just try to stay comfortable and basically don't even worry about escaping. Just worry about like staying safe and staying in the position on bottom and not get submitted. You know, that's kind of a first, I think, layer of getting comfortable is that time in position. What was the sign for you maybe that you kind of needed to get back to working on that position? You said brown and black belts kind of where you started to really develop that technique. What was it? Was this like something that happened that you feel like set the alarm bells going off to get you to start working on bottom side control?
Well, I don't know that it was like alarm bells, but what was going on? I mean, it's one of those things where sometimes you don't know until after you've done it. So I didn't go into it with a situation where I think that this is going to change my game, so I become like really good offensively. What was going on? The initial time that I started making this change was when I was a brown belt. Um, and I was in a situation around brown belt where I was really experiencing kind of a slump with my competitions, which again, I was very focused on competitions and stuff like that. And I was experiencing a slump where when I would go to competitions, I wasn't all that offensive. I would sometimes win matches, sometimes I'd lose them, but my matches were getting really rough. And in particular, I remember like winning some matches on advantages. And then it wasn't my way to lose or my way to win. Right. And I just
Mm.
was constantly playing it safe. And I remember one of my training partners, a guy named Jason Keaton, who we'll have him on the podcast sometime in the near future. He came in and he was like, "Hey man, I want to work on back escapes." And I was like, "Cool, let's work on back escapes." All right, cool, because that's one of my best positions, right? But then I was thinking about it, and I was thinking about the worst position that I had with Jason. And Jason, he had a judo background, and so he had like great. I believe he's a black belt in judo, so he has like just good pins. He could put you in side control, massive pressure. And so I was talking to him. I said, "Man, why don't you put me in side control? Because that's the worst position for me to deal with. Like I could escape his back mount. I didn't feel that bad from, but man, his side control just lit me up. And it was one of the things that when I rolled with Jason, again, I always kind of was like a little bit hesitant sometimes because
Mm.
man, if Jason got me and smashed me down, like I'm gonna get crushed. And I didn't like that. And so I was like, let's play from this position. So what we would do is we would come in and do some situational rolling back and forth from the positions that we were trying to work from. And we did this for like, I think a month straight on every week. We would come in and do this for like an hour or two as we were leading up for a competition. And, during the week, we would roll like, fight like dogs. And then when we would get right on the weekends, we would just do our situational training. And I remember by the time the competition came around, felt pretty good. I was like, I didn't feel very afraid of the position. I had at the end of it, I was like, man, I feel pretty damn good at this position. And this was the start of it. And then that competition ended up being really successful for me. I
Okay.
ended up going into that competition and I won the gi division with a bow and arrow choke in the finals. And then when I went to the no-gi division, I was mistakenly, well, I don't know, not really mistakenly, just foolishly, I didn't even look at the weight classes. I was
Yeah.
just in that kind of mood. I just basically was eating food and I was like, you know what? Wherever I land, I land. And so I got there and I just stepped on the scale. I had my hoodie on. I think I was eating a sandwich. I probably had watched like something on BJ Penn or read a BJ Penn blog because BJ Penn would do that stuff. He would show up to weigh-ins just eating food.
Yeah.
So I show up and I weigh in with all my stuff on, and I was like 213. And the weight cutoff was like some weird number, like 211. So all I had to do was take the hoodie off and put a freaking sandwich down. I would have been fine. But so I was in the heavyweight division, like the ultra heavyweight, all the big boys. And so there was no chance of me getting on top of one of these mudsuckers, bro. They were all big. The smallest guy that I faced that day was 245.
Jeez.
The biggest that I faced was 315. They were all wrestlers. It was just nothing but wrestlers. They were all like Ohio wrestlers that came in. They're doing the Arnold Classic, and they were tough, man. And so I'm looking at it thinking, well, I've got to play off my back and I have to be aggressive off my back. And I had an amazing performance from that competition. And I remember in particular going in there and I just felt so relaxed on my back because I was like, if one of these guys starts passing me, he can't hold me down. He's not going to pin me.
Yeah.
Because I know I can escape out of this. I've got a black belt that I train with every day who has massive pressure. He's not going to pin me down. And so I went in there and I had a really good game with my half guard and I started sweeping people and I ended up winning that competition no problem. Ended up facing, I think it was like 4 matches. And like I said, like the last guy I faced was 275 pounds, was an Ohio State champ in wrestling. He was a college wrestler, and I used my half guard game and ended up beating him pretty decisively by like a spread of like 12 points.
Nice.
And there was a point where he was actually passing my guard, and as soon as he did, I initiated my escape, got out of it, got back to half guard, and that was the only time where I felt like I was almost in danger. But that was kind of like that was one of the points where I started to understand, there's more to this than just being able to escape. By doing this, I'm now making myself able to play in a different way and be more offensive and to be more aggressive, things like that. And then there were several times where I would come back to this voluntarily, and I do this all the time. I put myself in bad positions so that I can play from those spots. And again, the more you do it, just the easier it gets. But that was kind of like a coming out party where it really changed things around and made me way more effective off my back. And even when I'm on top, when I go for submissions.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's just like it shows like the game plan working, or just not having fear. Honestly, like just knowing that you can. We have some guys at the gym that are very good at side control. If you can kind of, and I think one of those guys is not big, but asshole Rob. Rob, if he ever gets me a side control, is pretty tough for me. He's brown belt.
Very tough.
He's a little bigger than me, but not by
excessively,
much.
maybe by
not
10
by
pounds.
much.
Yeah,
not by much, but like his side control, I hate it. So if I'm ever in there, like it's it's tough. And so I try to avoid his side control. But other people that I roll with, like sometimes I'll kind of let them put me in some bad spots. If it's someone I feel like I'm significantly better than, I'll let them kind of get me in, and just so I can work from there and try to work out of a bad position. Because also, if I'm in a bad spot, I'm a little fatigued. Maybe I'll be a little bit tired. I have to work to get out of it, and I think it'll give me a little more of a challenge. So I think if you're an upper belt doing some of those things, it's always a great idea to do that. Chewy, I wanted to ask you, is there maybe 1 or 2 common mistakes you see in beginners that maybe like is a good thing to address? We talked about the panicking part. Is there anything else that you see? We have to talk really specifics, but maybe like concepts or maybe even like just ideas to think about when you're in that bad position.
Yeah, so I think that there's a few common mistakes that people make with their jiu-jitsu techniques in relation to their escapes and their defense. One of the big ones is they don't have like an approach, a process, or a system, if you want to call it that,
Okay.
of techniques and situations to fall back on, right? So when you watch people with their escapes are like very, I've got this one escape and I'm going to shove and I'm going to push, and there's no rhyme or reason as to why they're doing certain things, right? When you think about every other technique that we use, especially our offensive stuff, what do? I'm going to grab this grip. I'm going to grab this grip. I'm going to move my body this way. And once my body is into position, I'm going to do this, right? Even if it fails, there's still that approach. But with escapes, a lot of times that approach is not present. I'll ask people sometimes, why are you pushing there? Oh, I don't know, right? Like, whereas they have a far more deliberate process when it comes to offense. And so that's one thing. I see people where they don't have a process of setting things up with their escapes and going to them. They don't have again, when you think about the way that typically our processes in jiu-jitsu work. And again, by the way, you're developing these systems and processes, whether you know it or not.
Yeah.
It just happens. The more you use something, you start finding that things have common responses and you naturally adjust to them. Right.
Yeah.
But again, we have if this fails, then I'm going to do this. So like if I go for technique A, if it fails, then I can set up X, Y, or Z. And then if that fails, then I do that. And you just have this streamlined approach. Most people don't have that with their escapes. I see that all the time. And so that's one of the things that you have to develop that in order to be effective from the position. And then another thing is that people don't have a focus on their proper grips and body positioning being first. So again, going back to when you think of whenever we do a technique, it almost always starts with grab this, put your body in this manner. Like let's say if we're doing a scissor sweep, Jiu-Jitsu 101, cross collar, same side sleeve, I, shrimp a bit just so I can get my legs out. And then I bring my knee across the chest slightly at an angle. And then my bottom leg is going to be flat. And then I check the watch, check the time, scissor sweep time. We go for the sweep. Well, most people don't have, again, that approach. It goes back to the system thing, but they still don't focus on the grips and stuff. So even if they have an idea of how the techniques should be used effectively and how they should go for them, they don't have that. This is the grip that I need. and this is how I'm going to get that grip to position, right? You see that all the time, especially with newer people. And again, it comes from a lack of using the positions, and a lack of experience with the positions. And so I think that's a couple of really common ways. The process one's really important because that's something that people don't have, in a lot of cases, and you need that. You need that for every position in jiu-jitsu, not just with your offense.
Yeah, I think the other thing maybe that people don't have is well, they may have like one escape, one setup, but they don't have like a sequence or a chain of events. Like if this happens, that happens. So I may
Right.
try
That's
to
what I mean.
chain things together, right? Like so I know that if you place your hand here, I'm gonna go for this grip and this position, this submission, whatever. Same thing in bottom side control. If I get your hands to do this, or if
Mhm.
I get you to get your weight here, I'm gonna go to this technique or this way. So I think like having a an A than B or a B than C, whatever it is, just a way to chain things together. When you get a little better at this, you can kind of start to almost, off balance people. And that's what you want to do. You want to get their weight off of you and onto the mat in some way where you can have a little bit of mobility. So you're not just pinned and you can kind of go for your escape or start setting up another escape. So it's a sequence of events. So I think developing that, which at first you're like, I've got one thing I'm going to do and I'm going to get really good at that. But then a lot of times that one thing doesn't work, but it does elicit a reaction. From that reaction, you want to have the time to be ready to go and do your second part of the technique.
Right. And then one of the things too that is worth keeping in mind is thinking of like every other jiu-jitsu position. If you guys have followed me long enough, if you've listened to me talk, then you know this is something I constantly preach about. Like in jiu-jitsu, it is going to be better. And I wrote this up on Twitter the other day. It's really just like a repurposed Bruce Lee quote. But in my bearded opinion, it's better to have one technique that you can use that you've mastered and use and learn how to use it in 100 different ways
Yep.
than to have 100 different techniques that you haven't mastered and you have one way to use them each, right? Like it's
Yep.
better to have one thing that you just know how to use in lots of different ways, lots of variations to it. Because again, you can essentially use the same technique, but with different grips, different body positionings, things like this.
Yep.
And so one of the things, like with the way that I escape side control, it's relatively simple. I only have really the workhorses of my escape style from side control is like 3 different escapes. I just use them differently. I have different grips for them and different setups for them. There's different ways to off balance the person if they're inside control or if I set them up from guard retention situations early. But there's lots of ways to do that. And again, but there's 3 of them. They all connect together, so I can go from one to the next to the next. And there's ways to make them set them up in different ways. And so that's another thing to consider is that a lot of times the higher you go in jiu-jitsu, the less you get focused on trying to learn like a million different techniques, right? Most of the high level guys that I know, we end up getting really focused on a smaller number of techniques and just learning how to use that same technique over and over again. And again, this isn't just for jiu-jitsu. This is any grappling art. I mean, not even grappling art, just any combat sport in general. You can go look at boxing and boxers will be known for a particular punch
Mm.
or a particular style of punching, right? You can look at like the left hook of Joe Frazier, or you can look at like say certain people with their jabs, or you can even look at the peekaboo style that Mike Tyson had. And Mike Tyson had a really good hook to uppercut combo that was really wild to watch. He would use the same fist. He would hit you with a hook and then immediately use that same or that same hook or that same hand rather and shoot up an uppercut. It's a really hard thing to do fast, and he was really good at it. It was very much his thing that he knew. Now, again, jiu-jitsu is the same way. You'll see certain competitors, certain grapplers, certain people in jiu-jitsu who become known for a particular submission, and it's always been this way. Even guys like Rickson Gracie, who was renowned for being just like the master of everything in jiu-jitsu. The guy, when he fought, he used arm bars a lot, arm bars and rear naked chokes, but his arm bar in particular, you'd see that sucker being used over and over again, or a rear naked choke. And so again, you want to develop a good, clear style, a good, clear mastery of a smaller number of movements because there's so much to use. And by doing that, what you do is you make yourself more effective because instead of getting into a situation where you're overwhelmed by the amount of choices, you basically limit your options and you can go from here to here to here. And then again, I think that's a way to go for it. And again, this is something that we do from every other position, standing, from our sweeps and everything else. We're constantly figuring out our style and dialing down our techniques to a small number of ones that we've mastered that we can use again and again. But again, when it comes to escapes, sometimes it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes people forget that, again, you should be developing your own style, your own system of mastery from the bottom of escapes as well. And again, you become effective with those just like you would your other stuff. All right, guys. So hopefully you enjoyed the podcast. By the way, again, this is part 1. So we'll go into more about side control escapes on June the 21st. That's Friday. We'll go into that, and we'll go into ideas on principles for escaping. A little bit more of like information, a little bit more how to. Today's episode was more or less trying to get you to sort of buy into the idea that escaping is a really good idea, and it's good for more than just learning how to escape. Again, a lot of times it's almost like, again, when you think about the idea of like, what's the word? Being frugal with your money as an example, right? Like it sounds not fun because, it's not really fun to like not be able to do the things you want to do, right? Like you want to go out and spend money, you want to go out and buy these things. It's fun. But when you think about what being really intentional and frugal with your money does, is that it then allows you to do the things you want to do. Because, if you go out and spend money like crazy, then you end up becoming poor essentially. Because you might make a ton of money, but you can be poor for your stuff, right? So then what happens? Oh, you want to go and take a week off, or you want to go do this with your kids or whatever, but you can't because you got bills to pay, bro. You got to pay for all the stuff you bought. Or maybe you have an opportunity to take advantage of some business opportunity, something that pops up in front of you. You can't do it. You got too much debt. So when you practice a little bit of frugality, right, and you put a little bit of money away for your savings, then you can take those chances when it comes. And again, that is fun. And so you got to kind of rethink your brain. So with escapes, escaping isn't as fun as the offensive stuff, right? Of course. But because you develop your escapes, it works the same way, where then later on you get to have better submissions in offense because you have that in the bank. You have those abilities, right? So it's just an idea to chew on it. And I just want to sort of drive that home to you before we get into it. And next week we'll get into or later this week, depending on when you're listening this, on June the 21st, we'll get into some principles of it. And then again, that'll be live on YouTube around 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Just go to my YouTube and you'll find it. Again, thanks to our sponsors for helping make this podcast happen. You can check out Charlotte's Web CBD. Again, they are the premier CBD company that's out there. They make a fantastic product, and you get 30% off your order with the promo code Chewjitsu30, CHEWJITSU 30 at checkout. Also, thanks to our buddy Matt at Epic Roll, who supports the podcast, as well as a lot of jiu-jitsu competitors out there. He's a jiu-jitsu black belt who trains, competes, does all the same stuff we do, and he has some really great gear. If you want to check out some of his t-shirts, rash guards, shorts, gis, whatever it might be, great designs, great quality, great customer service, epicrollbjj.com. Promo code is Chewjitsu20 for 20% off the order. If you guys want to become a patron and support the podcast directly, then you can do so by going to patreon.com/the-jiu-jitsu-podcast. When you join, you'll get an ad-free version of the podcast. You'll get some other bonuses, as well as an exclusive library of content where you get more clips and things like that from yours, Bearded and Eugene. And then also too, on top of that, you get a lot of different content we've never released anywhere else, like seminars we've recorded, stretching and warm-up routines that can be really effective if you're a little bit tight, a little bit rigid, need a little bit more mobility, especially for some of you guys that are, getting a little bit older, or if you are training a lot and you're not doing anything to work on recovery. Again, that stuff's really important. And again, it's a really inexpensive price, and you can unsubscribe or subscribe at any time. And so you can get that at patreon.com/the-jiu-jitsu-podcast. And last but not least, if you want to get my daily email, then do so by subscribing at chewjitsu.net/join. When you join, you'll pop in your email. I will then send you some free gifts. I mean, I don't send them to you, but the system does. The program that I have does. It'll send you some free gifts, ebooks, and videos, and then you can dive into those, and hopefully those help you with your jiu-jitsu training. And then on top of that, you will get emails from me. Now, the emails can be everything from jiu-jitsu training ideas, philosophy on training, weight training stuff, because I'm a meathead, diet ideas, because I think that stuff's really important. Again, I look at everything from jiu-jitsu as a holistic thing rather than just looking at just technique, right? I'm looking at the body just as much as the technique we do. And then also too, you guys know that I'm a reader. I'm always diving into some book. And so I like sharing books that I'm reading, ideas from the things that I've come across with you guys, and then whole lot of stuff. So it's all in there. And then you'll also get exclusive offers and discounts to things that I have going on that I do not release anywhere else. Again, that's at chewjitsu.net/join. Join up whenever you're ready. You can unsubscribe at any time. And guys, with that said, we'll talk to you guys on Friday. Join us live and talk to you then.